It's 2006. I'm on a road trip with my friend Carl. As we were heading to my home, Carl got an emergency call and he said that he needs to go back home immediately. As it was a running route, I told him to go, saying that I could find myself a ride home. I hesitated for a moment as I stood on the side of the road, thumb outstretched in the hope of catching a ride home. It was getting late, and I didn't fancy walking the long miles back in the dark. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, a rumbling sound broke the silence. A massive truck appeared, pulling over to the side of the road in front of me. The driver leaned over. "Need a lift, kid?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Relieved, I nodded and hopped into the passenger seat. The interior of the truck smelled of diesel fuel and old leather, and I settled in, ready to enjoy the company and the much-needed ride home. "My name's Paul," I introduced myself, extending my hand towards the driver. "Call me Jack," he replied, giving me a firm handshake. "Where are you headed, Paul?" I provided him with my destination. He nodded, his eyes never leaving the road. We exchanged small talk as we travelled along the darkened highway, Jack sharing stories of his life on the road while I listened intently. As we continued driving, something began to feel off. Jack's demeanour shifted, his eyes darting nervously and his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. My instincts kicked in, and a wave of unease washed over me. I inquired if everything's all right. Jack glanced at me, his eyes reflecting a mix of fear and desperation. "Listen, kid," he said, his voice quavering. "I'm in a tight spot and I need your help." Confusion swept over me and I leaned back in my seat, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to make the situation worse, but something told me I couldn't ignore the distress in his voice. "What do you need, Jack?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack took a deep breath and confessed. "I've got some valuable cargo in the back. Some people are after it and they'll stop at nothing to get it. I need you to help me defend it or we're both in danger." Fear gripped my heart as I tried to comprehend the situation. I'd unwittingly stepped into a dangerous game and I'd no choice but to play along if I wanted to survive. With a surge of adrenaline, I agreed to help Jack and my mind racing to come up with a plan. We devised a strategy using whatever makeshift weapons we could find in the truck. Hours passed and tension hung in the air. Jack's driving became more erratic as he manoeuvred through winding roads, doing his best to shake off our pursuers. With each near miss and close call, my heart pounded in my chest, wondering if I would ever make it out alive. Finally, as the sun began to rise on the horizon, Jack managed to lose our pursuers and we pulled off the road into a secluded spot. Exhausted and trembling, we caught our breath, the weight of the ordeal sinking in. "Thank you, Paul," Jack said in his voice laced with gratitude. "You saved my life." I looked at him, my own relief mingled with the newfound wisdom. "No, Jack, we saved each other." We sat there in silence, the weight of our shared experience hanging heavily in the air. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the world around us, I realized that this terrifying journey had taught me more about myself than any smooth ride ever could. I was driving on the highway late one night, headed home from a long haul. I was tired and just wanted to get home and some sleep. But I saw a guy over on the side of the road hitchhiking. I didn't really want to stop, but I felt bad for him, so I pulled over. The guy got in the truck and introduced himself as John. He was in his early 20s with short brown hair and a scruffy beard. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt and jeans, and he had a backpack and a duffel bag with him. "Where you headed?" I asked him. "I'm going to Los Angeles, trying to start a new life." "That's great. I'm sure you'll do great." We talked for a while about our lives and where we were from. John told me about his childhood in a small town and how he'd always dreamed of moving to Los Angeles. I told him about my job as a truck driver, and I was looking forward to spending some time with my family. After a while, we fell silent. I was starting to get tired, and I could tell that John was too. We drove for a few more hours, and then I pulled over at a rest stop. "Why don't we stretch our legs?" I said. John agreed, and we got out of the truck. We walked around for a few minutes. Then we sat down on a bench. "Thanks for the ride," John said. "I really appreciate it." "No problem. It was my pleasure." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, and John turned to me. "Can I ask you a question?" I said. "Sure," he replied. I asked, "What's in the bag?" I nodded at his duffel bag. He hesitated for a moment and said, "It's just some clothes." "Can I see?" I asked again because I felt that there's something heavy in it. He hesitated again, but somehow allowed me to have a look into it. I opened his duffel bag, and as I reached the zip, I felt a heavy hit on the side of my head that made me go unconscious. I woke up in the evening with a pain on the right side of my skull, and John was nowhere to be found. All I could remember was a glimpse of some sort of body covered in reddish stuff. Most probably it was a corpse covered in blood. I thought about John for the rest of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something that abhorrent along. I wondered what really was in that bag. The next day I was still thinking about John when I got home. I told my wife about him, and she told me that I should call the police. I didn't want to get involved, but I knew that I had to do something. Called the police and told them what had happened, and they said they would send someone out to investigate. A few hours later, the police came to my house. They asked me to tell them everything that had happened. I told them about John, the bag, and how he'd asked me about it. The police took my statement, and they said they'd look into it. They never called me back, and I never heard from John again. I was a new trucker, and I was excited to be finally on my own. I'd been driving for a few months with a partner, but now it was time to go out on my own. I was a little nervous, but I was also excited for the challenge. I was driving down a deserted road in the middle of the night as I noticed some flames. It was a car. It was on fire. I pulled over and got out of my truck. I ran over to the car, and I saw that there was a woman inside. She was trapped. I looked around for something to help her. There was nothing. I saw a tree branch, so I ran over and used that to break the window of the car. The woman was screaming. She was covered in flames. I grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. Fortunately, little damage was done and she was safe. I carried her to my truck and drove to the nearest hospital, headed back to my truck, and drove away. I drove for a few more hours, and then I pulled over to take a nap. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up and started my truck. I was about to drive away when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was a woman I'd saved. She was standing in the middle of the road. I got out of my truck and walked over to her. She just kept staring at me with these empty black eyes. I started to feel scared and asked her what she wanted. She started to walk towards me, and I started to back away. Didn't know what to do. I was frozen with fear. She kept walking towards me. I kept backing away. "I'm going to save you," she said. "You have to promise me you will never forget me," she said. "You have to promise me that you'll always remember what I did for you." "I promise," I said. She smiled, and then she disappeared into thin air. These were some true incidents that happened to truckers. Make sure you never trust a random trucker, because you might end up in some serious trouble. Hopefully you liked it. Share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back with more traumatic experiences. Till then, bye.